Fála iarmh a cairde agus fáilte ríist chuig cruinniú poblí de chuid an túdarrás pólíneachta le Commissioner a Garda Síochána agus a chuireann. Fáilte speisialta rót Commissioner a Chúlán an céad uair go bhfuil tú anseo sa fosnú a Commissioner a Garda Síochána. Welcome everybody to this meeting in public of the Policing Authority with the Commissioner of the Garda Síochána and his team. Welcome to those here and to those who are watching us at home on the web. A particular welcome to Commissioner O'Coulon on the first occasion that he comes to us in that capacity. I know you've been here before. We've already met and we've already agreed that we're going to work closely together to pursue and continue to maintain a focus on the reform agenda in the Garda Síochána. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge publicly the long and distinguished policing career of Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan, her strong vision for the Garda Síochána, her commitment to reform, particularly her personal empathy and the effort she put in to supporting victims of crime, and a number of the initiatives taken in relation to the victim service, I think will be a tribute to her particular focus in that area in the time ahead. I think, Commissioner, we agreed when we met of the need for a unified and strong continued message of modernisation and reform, which will require obviously a serious effort from yourselves, but also be supported and driven by the authority's oversight function. I'd like to invite you, if you wish, to make a short opening remarks before we move on to the business of the agenda.
Míle buchas a gáil leataine agus le buil ile an údras. Chean na teachtarachtaí deátheile agus deagaí tá fáte agam webar fad, maidir le mo cheapachán mar Commissioner gníomhach. Sné an teachtar céanna bháil mhúirte eistid go mé mis freisin gobar go dlú lifse ar fad, mé héana agus marin. Chun na príomhachtaí tá leachaí máchrún ó híomh seirbhís den scáchar ar fáil de phobal ilin de tíre seo. Agus freisin leanach leis an glár aithnuchanna agus tá go leor tinsnamh sa glár sin a thiúras cónagóin an seirbhís sin ausú harna mléanta le cónaidé. Thank you very much, Chair, for your kind remarks, and also I'd like to thank the authority members for their goodwill and messages of goodwill since my appointment as Acting Commissioner. I look forward to working very closely with all of you and my leadership team and staff in relation to servicing your committees and in, as you say, ensuring that our focus is maintained on our priorities, which is a common priority for all of us in relation to the policing service for the people of this country. So we look forward to that. I'd also like to be associated with your remarks about former Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan. I've already paid tribute to her in public, so just to be associated with what you've said. Thank you very much.
Margaret Thornell. Moving on to our agenda, as you know, we've organised our business in public session largely around the policing plan chapters or around the reform programme chapters. And this month's meeting has a large focus on the chapter of the policing plan relating to confronting crime. Do I need to stop and check the audio? Is it okay? Seemed to be a bit of feedback there. Are we all right? Yeah. All right, thank you. The work in relation to the questioning in relation to the confronting crime chapter is being handled through our Policing Performance Committee, as you might imagine. And the first set of questions come from Maureen Lynott, who's going to talk to you about crime prevention and victims. Maureen.
Commissioner and colleagues, Robert Peel, one of your founding fathers of your discipline, in his Principles of Law Enforcement, said that the basic mission for which the police exist is to prevent crime and disorder, and that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with it. So if I have a few questions for you, in terms of prioritizing, where is crime prevention versus crime fighting in Garda Síochána?
Thank you, Maureen. Yes, I think it's very clear from our strategy statement and also from the MRP that crime prevention has taken a key role in our approach to policing. And it is exactly as you have stated, a very important aspect, and it should be the main string to our bow in relation to how we approach our work in that regard. So I think there are a few recent operations which, by focusing on the crime prevention element, we have seen huge dividends, and I instance Operation Thor in that regard. And I know that we are trying to instill in everyone with an operational focus a refocus on that aspect of policing, that we should be for crime prevention in the first instance, and then if something happens, of course, we need to have a quality investigation aspect following that up. But I think John could give you more detail in relation to the type of approach we're taking across the board in this regard.
Thanks, Commissioner. Maureen, I think we talked some length about this previously. We have recently published a crime prevention strategy for the organisation, and I suppose it focuses on a number of things. It focuses on what we call our priority areas. It focuses on implementation, how we're going to go about it. It focuses on what we believe will be the expected outcomes, and then what are the features of it. So while it's quite detailed and quite complex, the strategy, but maybe just before I go into the detail, if I can give you a simple example in relation to Operation Thor. We looked at Operation Thor under 5 pillars, one of which was crime prevention. So it focused on the area of burglaries, and we did a strategic assessment of what was required from a crime prevention perspective to reduce the incidence of burglary. And we led that influence then, our analytics, our predictive analytics fed into that and had a crucial role in the deployment of our resources, both from a prevention and detection perspective. So in practical and in real terms, it influences every day, every part of our operations. And every operation we do, the first thing we do, we consider how can we prevent this crime from happening. And I think the clearest example we have, if I'm to look at the priority areas, in relation to the first priority, it's about our structure and our culture. So what's the structure in which we address crime prevention? What's the culture relating to it? The next priority area is delivering a consistent service in that. So is it the same in Cork as it is in Donegal? Similarly, have we customised crime prevention approaches across the country? And then how do we communicate that message? So there are priority areas, and then we have a whole lot of actions as to what we'll do in relation to ensuring that we achieve those objectives.
How do you know, because this is an issue that, as in most large organizations, and it has been an issue in Garda Síochána in different aspects, how do you satisfy yourself that A, it's the crime prevention strategy and activities are in place to a consistent standard and emphasis across the country?
Well, I think it's a very important question, and it's a challenge that we continue to focus on and address. In our most recent strategy, that particular point that you make has probably got more attention and focus than in previous documents. And I have been appointed as the ambassador by the Commissioner, but we have a specific lead in the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Community Engagement and Public Safety. He's responsible for the policy in this area, and then for ensuring the consistent application of each of the various different areas across the country. So he will advise the Garda Executive that he has satisfied himself as to how that has been done. Now again, this is a work in progress. This is a strategy issued in May of this year, and this is the plan as it is currently being rolled out.
Am I
so there is a
correct
specific...
That Assistant Commissioner is not here today?
He's not, no.
No, that's Assistant Commissioner Leahy?
Yes.
Okay. This crime prevention strategy that you're describing, John, was launched earlier in the year. Is it fully implemented across the country?
No would be the answer to that. It's in the process of being implemented. And various aspects of it have been implemented. Some are further down the road than others. But we have a specific plan created, and that has commenced. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. It hasn't been completed. It is really in its infancy in many respects in terms of its implementation, and it will take some time. One other point on that is another aspect of how we measure it is in our public attitude survey. So a key thing is about how do the public feel about all of this, and also then from the statistics that we provide in relation to crime committed. Has that increased? Is it up or is it down? So there also there's a number of indicators that we use to assess our progress in this area.
Thank you. Maybe we can come back at some later point about by the end of the year as to the status of the implementation. It's meant to be fully implemented by year end, I think. Yeah. Okay. All right. Will I go on to victims now? Okay. When crime isn't prevented, of course, through luck or just bad fortune or mistakes and errors, victims are the ones who suffer crime. And the new EU Victims Directive is implemented here in Ireland now, and what that requires for our audience is there's consistent requirements and timings on a range of supports and information across the criminal justice system to victims of crime of all types. And obviously, types of crime have varying needs, therefore, of the victims of those crimes. What is in place now on Garda Síochána in regard to resources, training of your people, information, materials, and time frame for full and complete implementation of the directive?
We have a number of various elements of that implemented. The directive has been implemented and it was included in all of our every incident that is created. There is information that has to be provided as part of that in compliance with the EU directive. And that's in place since November. I think it's November of last year that is in place in connection with a rollout of Pulse. We have established a victim service office, which are currently up and running in every division, every Garda division in the country. And all of those people have been trained in advance of that.
They're in every part of the country now?
In every Garda division in the country. So there's 28 Garda divisions, and they're up and running, and they're in place, and they are resourced and fully. They're providing that kind of oversight in relation to the victims of crime in terms of feedback, in terms of liaison, in terms of providing them with the necessary support and having a specific point of contact for the Garda victims that they need. In addition to that, we have established what we call our Protective Services Bureau. So understanding the needs of vulnerable victims, particularly in this area, we have acknowledged the need that their need is probably slightly different from others. So we have in 3 divisions at this moment, we have established 4 units, and they have been established again since earlier on this year. It's in the early stage of pilot. They provide a specialist investigative service. So again, acknowledging the need of these particular victims, we have provided a dedicated resource focusing specifically on the needs of these victims. It does fit in under Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll and the National Protective Service Bureau, and he has ultimate responsibility for that. But it also fills in or is a central part of our public attitude survey. And Gretchen can talk about how has evolved and has developed. But there is an amount of work. There is more to be done, and it will continue to do in terms of the National Protective Services Bureau and a further rollout of them.
And just the same question I asked in the prior topic. How will you assess the consistent implementation and meeting the required standards across the country from one division to the next?
Well, Assistant Commissioner O'Sullivan or O'Driscoll has specific responsibility for the governance and the oversight of these particular units. And while they're deployed locally to provide that investigation technique, he will ensure he will have oversight of that. But it's also a key part of our public attitude survey.
No, I
So
know
we'll
that,
keep
and
a close eye on that.
I'm going to get to the public. My last question will be on the public attitude survey. But again, for many large organizations, but I think we can say it has happened in the Garda, there has not been consistency in standards and implementation around the country, and I know that's one of the challenges you face. So how are you going to ensure this?
Well, among the initiatives that we're undertaking at the moment is the Garda National Protective Services Bureau, in conjunction with our IT section, is developing key performance indicators with a focus on the agreement and understanding of the criteria to be used to ensure that we are fully implementing the Victims Directive. We're also in the process of designing standard operating procedures for that specific purpose of ensuring that all members of the Garda Síochána, all personnel within the Garda Síochána are aware of their specific responsibilities and at the various stages in the criminal justice system. We're going through the Victims Directive and we're identifying areas that we can work on. We're developing an MOU with the prison service so that examining specific provisions of the directive so that we can ensure that victims are not re-victimised. We're developing an online system for reporting specific offences. The Garda website has been updated to ensure that it includes information.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
When you have your KPIs and all, I presume you'll share them.
As soon as
we'll
they're
get a
fully
look at that.
developed,
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I'm going to move on to my final question, but before I do, I think it would be fair to say that civilianization would be an important component of the services to victims.
Yes, and already within the Protective Services Bureau there is a growing number of civilian personnel, but it is an area
and then it would free up sworn guards.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's
And each of the divisional protective service units have clerical member of staff as part of that team.
Yeah, okay. My final question, your 2016 victim satisfaction survey, your satisfaction survey, I believe, I wouldn't want to get it wrong, Gertrude, I believe said that amongst victims, the satisfaction rate was 51%, which is quite middling, although indications are that there will be improvement in 2017, and we certainly hope that is the case. And feedback on the ground from the new victim services offices is, as you say, John, very, very positive, and it makes perfect sense. They're designed to really listen to and help them. How do you, for people who don't go to the victim service, well, I have two questions, and I'll make them very quick. What do you want that victim satisfaction rate to get to, realistically? And secondly, for victims who don't go to the victim services office, they don't live near them, they don't know about them, they're afraid, and they have to engage with the Gardaí. What is the awareness of attention to the particular needs of victims amongst Gardaí, who are primarily responsible for crime prevention and catching criminals?
I was going to make that the individual Garda in charge of cases, they don't just hand the victim over to someone else to manage. They retain ownership of that relationship, where it's I suppose improved on from how we did it in the past is that, I mean, all Gardaí are off for certain hours of the day, they take their breaks, they're on leave. It's important that there's a continuous element of say, the victim's offices there to carry it through when the member themselves aren't available. But I think it's critical that we ensure, and that is part of our message, that just because the victim's offices have been set up doesn't remove responsibility for care and liaison with that victim by the investigating member of any given crime.
Yeah, because it's day and night between the experience of,
Yes.
in general, of people using, say, the normative Garda services and the people using the victim services offices, and there's a big lesson in that. Okay, what is your goal for what you'd like the victim satisfaction rate to be at in the next 2 years?
I think it's actually quite a good question.
You sound surprised.
It's not one actually I've considered. Obviously, we do want our victim satisfaction to increase. The question is, to what level, at what reach point do it get optimal? It's not one, I have to say, that I've considered. I think, our focus so far has been to try and think about how best to improve the victim experience based on what we can see from the public attitude survey and some additional analysis. And we've been kind of identifying where the gaps exist, mainly in terms of the provision of information. And we're seeing from the public attitude survey that actually the provision of information is actually increasing. And I think that's a key element of driving public satisfaction up. I suppose one of the things that we can look at is trying to benchmark ourselves against other jurisdictions and see how other jurisdictions are doing. And I think, but again, that leads to the difficulty
but I think
of compatibility.
You're absolutely correctly placing a very strong priority on improved victim care. I think you would need to attach to it what your expectation is of what this is going to deliver.
I think our expectation is that we improve
I
and that we continue.
that.
But I think that's a long-term view and a long-term vision. I think putting a number on it is less important than we need to continue to improve the service. And no matter what figure we reach, there's always room to improve. And you continue to strive. It's continuous improvement. It's a continuous cycle that continues to evolve. The needs of the victim will be different next year as it is today. We need to understand and be aware of what that is, and we need to have the flexibility and the agility and the understanding to move in accordance with that. So I think it's continuous improvement over the other time. Just one other key point that I just would like to emphasise from an earlier question is we actually bring our service to the victims. And we don't, there is not an expectation that victims have to come to An Garda Síochána. We bring the service to them. And we continue to work through a number of different kind of mechanisms to ensure that we provide the service to them, and a very, very valuable, important service, not only provided by us, but the other NGOs in this particular area.
Okay,
If I could just add that as recently as yesterday, management in the Garda Protective Services Bureau met with the Director of Training to ensure that all issues relating to victims are dealt with in an appropriate way in the training of new personnel coming into the Garda Síochána. So there's ongoing discussions going on in that regard.
Thanks,
Good,
John.
and thank you.
Thank you. I think, we are mindful of the onwards and upwards scenario that you set out, and you will remember that in our third report on your modernisation plan, we did particularly report very positive feedback from victims' representatives. And it's important to acknowledge that. I think, though, you can reckon that we will still be pressing for a number in next year's policing plan, just to give you something to reach for. Because the point about it, yes, of course, victims' needs will change. We won't know whether you're keeping up with them unless there's a number around it. And as I say, that probably wouldn't surprise you. But we'll talk about the detail of that again. Judith's going to ask some questions now about detections and about organised crime.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner, to you and your team. I think it might be helpful, first of all, just to explain in layperson's terms to the public what is meant by a detection under the accounting rules. It'd just be helpful to understand exactly what that means.
I might maybe ask Gertrude if he wants to maybe outline the detail and the specifics around that.
So, a detection. A detection occurs when there is a charge or summons against an individual. So when there is enough evidence to take them forward either into custody or to bring a case against them. But there's other circumstances where a detection occurs. So a detection occurs when an adult caution is given. Now the legislation is very tight. Adult cautions can only be given for certain types of offences. You can also be referred to the youth diversion programme. So that's also kind of considered a detection. So there's about 3 or 4 legitimate scenarios in which you can mark an incident as detected.
As I understand it, in addition to those aspects that you've mentioned, that if a victim or an essential witness declines to pursue a prosecution or is unable to attend court, that's still counted as a detection. That's in the counting rules. Am I correct in that?
Well, I want to emphasise two things here. The first thing is in terms of the incident, and just so everybody's clear about this one, we record an incident irrespective of whether there's a complaint coming forward or not. And that's really important. So even if we come across an incident and there's a victim of crime there and the victim of crime doesn't want to make a complaint, if the member feels that there's on all probability a crime has occurred, it's marked as detected. Now, in terms of the detection,
my point is more, sorry, Gertrude, to interrupt you, but my point is more around the number of times when it's clear that a crime has been committed, that a statement of complaint is taken, and then at some stage later on during the process, the victim either withdraws the statement of complaint or is unable to attend court. Am I correct in saying that that still counts as a detection in your counting rules?
Yes is the answer, and I just have we've a HQ circular, and that is the first point that it refers to in relation to it, where there is sufficient available evidence that would, if it was possible to bring into court, it would stand up. So yes is the answer to that question.
So it is often the case from my experience that in the public's mind, a detection means that there has been some sort of judicial outcome, even if it's an adult caution, or if it's a conditional discharge or what it might be in court. In the public's mind, a detection means that there has been some sort of judicial outcome. But in the definition, it actually can mean that there hasn't been such an outcome. So do you know what percentage of your detections actually fall into that latter category where a victim has withdrawn a statement?
I couldn't give you the figure of that now, but it's certainly something that we can work out and we can bring it back. And it certainly is something that in the data quality piece of it, we can maybe talk about in more detail as to what our proposals are in that particular area. But the exact numbers, I will have to come back to you over that.
Because, in committee we've been having a lot of discussions around the falling detection rates, and in particular around the area of sexual crime and violent crime against the person. And my concern is that whilst you've helpfully given us reassurance that in some areas the fall has been arrested in property crime, but in those most serious contact violent crimes and sexual crimes, actually the detection rates have quite seriously deteriorated. So I want to know what's being done around that.
Well, as you rightly say, it was one of the objectives in the policing plan was to increase the number of reporting crimes in this particular area, to give confidence to members of the public that they will come forward, and that has been achieved. In the specific area of the detection of sexual crime, there has been a reduction, as you say. We have a number of strands of work going on behind this to fully understand exactly what the reason is behind it. There is a time lag, and the investigation of a sexual crime is slower because there's medical reports and there's various stuff, and the sensitivities around all of the various different
That's
people.
Always been the case, John. It's always been the case.
Sure, but there is a greater understanding and appreciation of the need for detail in terms of the detection of these cases. So there is a lot of work going into it, and there still has been quite a number of them have been detected. The work that's going on at the moment will give us greater clarity around what is the reason behind this. What are we understanding? Is it because fewer victims or people are coming forward, or witnesses don't want to come forward? So there is that work is still ongoing in that particular area.
Well, what we do know is that sexual offence reporting is actually going up. It's marginal, but it is going up.
Yes.
And that the detection rate has gone down considerably. So it's to the tune of some 19%, I believe, that the detection rate has gone down. And I fully accept what you say about the time lag between the offence taking place and the issue actually going to court. But it has always been the case that it's taken that length of time. So what has changed, and why is there such a very considerable difference between last year's performance and this year's performance?
Well, I don't think there has been a variable difference. I think what we have to understand is there is a time lag involved in this, and I don't think we can use the same analysis that just because it was then, it is now. There are various different aspects of the crime. The sexual crime is of various different degrees of seriousness, and that takes time. And this is an area that takes a lot of time. It's particularly sensitive. It has gone in with part of our Protective Service Bureau, so there's greater attention to the detail. There's greater awareness of the crime and the crime counting rules around all of this. So it's something that I say that we are looking at. But certainly, I am confident that the detection rate will come year end and come into the future will be of similar to previous years. And I don't see this as being anything else other than an investigative issue where some of them are tied up. I don't think that this is anything else other than that. And certainly I am confident in that regard. What I'm saying about the detail to understand behind this is it is vitally important that we understand exactly what we're talking about. So in any detection of crime, particularly in this particular area, is there a key driver behind that reduction? And we're not seeing anything that's specific. There is nothing that's causing us any particular concern that people aren't doing one thing or the other that they were last year, and we're certainly happy to. I don't know maybe whether, John, you want to add
I think it's maybe something that in committee,
Sure.
we can explore
Can I just add,
in further detail.
The Garda National Protective Services Bureau is currently engaged with the NGO sector and the DPP's office, specifically in relation to this area, for the purpose of improving the quality of sexual crime investigations, and therefore trying to increase the rate of successful prosecutions, and also for the purpose of trying to ensure that victims stay within the criminal justice system. So this is actively being pursued, aside from the necessity to try and better understand why detection rates are as they are.
Okay, I started this area of questioning asking about the definition of a detection. Is that definition well understood across the organisation, and are you confident in the accuracy of your detection figures?
I think that's something that has got a lot of public debate in recent times, is about the understanding of the crime counting rules. And I'm conscious of the most recent report that's issued by the Central Statistics Office between ourselves, the Department of Justice, and the CSO, and there has been an acceptance that there is an urgent need to improve the understanding of the crime counting rules. We are in the process of creating examples so that members of An Garda Síochána are clear what's the correct classification and what are the correct rules around detections. There will be, between now and the end of the year, there will be a training programme for all of our senior officers in this particular area. It will be led by Assistant Commissioner Finn and by Gertrude from the analyst section. So it's certainly something that previous reports have highlighted this. It's something that we have accepted, and there's a very, very clear plan. The work has been done. We have a lot of work done in the background, and over the winter months we expect that all of our senior officers will receive training on the exact rules around the crime classification, because they all change. There are many, many different variations and scenarios in every crime incident within the same crime type. The circumstances are completely different. So the clarity and the understanding of all the people is hugely important.
Well, I know it's something that's likely to be front and centre in the policing plan for next year. Yeah. Time doesn't allow me to go into this in any further detail, so I'm going to move on to the area of organised crime. And Commissioner, in the Modernisation and Renewal Programme, you referred to strengthening your capability regarding organised crime. And a key part of this was the development of the threat and risk of organised crime groups, and a matrix and a framework by which to focus on that. But I know the project is currently at risk in your reporting framework owing to lack of resources. So in view of the public concern regarding organised crime, could you give us a view on the progress of this project and when you think the framework will be implemented to assess the threat and risk of organised crime groups?
We might ask maybe Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll, who is leading the project in terms of developing that risk assessment. You might want to talk about.
Well, first of all, we're discussing this on a day, fortunately, that we have two people in court today charged with money laundering offences, which is a very difficult offence to pursue. So we look upon that as a significant development. I have left this morning a cross-border conference where I, for the last 48 hours, basically have been with all the crime-fighting agencies based in Northern Ireland, Her Majesty's Customs, the PSNI, the UK Border Agency, along with the UK Crime Agency, and representatives of the Garda Síochána, our own revenue service, and we have been together over the last 2 days developing strategies specifically relating to the border. Again, in the last 24 hours, there has been a very significant seizure of drugs at Dublin Port, and there are people, presumed people will be before the court shortly. We're developing strategies in relation to every aspect of organised crime.
But it's specifically the framework to assess the threat and risk of organised crime groups, which is in the Modernisation and Renewal Programme and in this year's policing plan. I'm particularly interested in that.
Well, that is a work in progress, and we're basically trying to ensure that we are aware of all the various crime groups that exist, of all the crime types that they are engaged in, and we do this in conjunction with our interactions at an international level with Europol, where there is an assessment of the overall level of crime gangs within the European Union.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I fully understand there's a lot of really excellent work going on around organised crime, and you've had some fabulous seizures recently of both drugs and firearms and other property.
And indeed, in terms of crime prevention, which was discussed earlier.
But the question is around the framework, the development of a framework, an evidence-based framework to assess the risk of organised crime groups. And that is a project that is currently at risk on your reporting register. So can you just give me some sense of when that project will be completed?
Well, there's cooperation between all the bureaus, the national bureaus at the moment. We're trying to develop at the centre of those bureaus within my central office a mechanism for ensuring that we have all the risks established and that the appropriate action is being taken in relation to all those risks. In the busy environment of the day-to-day action and the significant level of activity in targeting organised crime, it is the case that we haven't developed that to the extent that we would like to have, but it is something that we're very much determined to do and to do as soon as possible.
Have you any idea of a timescale by which it would be complete?
Well, I would hope that within a 6-month period, but there would be significant development even by the end of this year. Within a 3-month framework that we would be advanced.
So that's within 6 months from now, you're saying?
Yeah, from now.
Okay.
I think there's an ICT element of this which is currently being scoped out and worked on, and I think when we get clarity around that piece, we will be able to give you an exact definitive date. I think that's where the issue it currently lies at the moment. But we will be able to bring, I think, as I said, we do expect it to be 6 months. Unfortunately, some of these things go off kilter. In this particular issue, it is an ICT piece of it.
Sorry, we see the development of the crime management system, which will come to fruition next year, has been very significant in this. Without a proper system of that nature, it is very difficult to do the necessary work to analyse the extent and the nature of the various types of crime. And this will be one of, in my view, as a detective for many years, this is something that we have required for decades, and that will come to fruition in the third quarter, I think, of 2018, and will help us significantly in this area.
Well, can I just say how much the authority welcomes the recent seizures, very significant seizures of drugs and firearms in Dublin and in Cork, and to congratulate everybody involved in those. I know these things take time and a lot of intensive work, so really well done on those. But how does your seizure of drugs and weapons in particular compare to previous years? And do you have any assessment regarding access to firearms in particular? I'm not asking you to say anything in the public domain that would be in any way sensitive, but is your assessment that organised crime groups have greater access or lesser access to firearms now than before, given the seizure details?
Undoubtedly, organised crime has easy access to firearms. And I suppose one of our greatest successes in the organised crime area in recent times has been in relation to the threat to life incidents where we have intervened, which is a very significant crime prevention aspect to what we do. There is undoubtedly many lives saved. There was an expectation when a particular feud between two gangs began that there were going to be numerous murders over a period of time, but instead what has happened is we have a never-increasing number in a region of about 40 incidents where we have prevented loss of life, and where that has involved the seizure of firearms and the charging of people. And taking out, there are only so many people who will engage in that sort of activity, and each hit gang that we take out of the scene has the capacity to save additional lives into the future. So that is a priority for us going into the future.
Final question from me, and thank you for that, John. What safeguards are in place to make sure that everybody acts ethically in intelligence-led, proactive operations?
Well, what I can say is that, again, a fortunate development for me, because of austerity, we did not have any vacancies filled for a considerable period of time. In recent months, I have got the additional personnel that have now come through the system. We had to wait for a sufficient number of people to go through Templemore and to be on the beat before we could start withdrawing people. But I got 55 sergeants, I think, in a short period of time. And the first thing that we did was brought them together in a room, and we spoke. I personally spoke to them for an hour and a half, and the emphasis was on ethics. And basically, those people were told that we don't want them unless they do the business in an ethical fashion. And it was as blunt and as clear as that.
All of our operational policing plans have a human rights and ethical element aspect of it. So every single plan we do is looked at it from that particular perspective. So it's a constant message that's constantly spoken to our people, and that's outside of the training and all of the other elements of it. But the specific question you asked related to our operational policing plan, every single plan that we prepare has a human rights aspect and element included in it.
Thank you. It's probably something we'll explore in greater detail in the Ethics Committee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Noel Brett's going to talk to you now for a few minutes about violent crime in particular. Noel?
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Commissioner and colleagues. I'd like to kick off by focusing a little bit around Operation Thor, which appears to have resulted in significant reductions in crime in 2016. The number of burglary offences recorded in 2016 appears to be 30% lower than in 2015. And the number of both criminal damage offences and public order offences recorded also show a significant reduction of more than 10% year on year. I think overall, across the three areas, 2016 was the lowest year since the CSO began publishing these figures in 2003. So it has clearly been a very successful operation. What I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about is what learning you as an organisation have from the experience of running Operation Thor. What of the future of it, and what other areas of policing can you bring this learning and this effectiveness to bear?
I suppose, and again, I'll ask maybe John and Gertrude to come in terms of some of the detail. Operation Thor was set up to tackle a specific type of crime. It was a crime that, the crime of burglary, which had a dreadful impact on the communities, the length and breadth of the country. And was at a particular time when this particular crime type was on the increase. So it was of particular concern to us. We looked at it under 5 particular strands. The first strand we looked at it was on crime prevention, and we had a very detailed plan in relation to crime prevention. The second area we looked at it was on the victimisation. So where we had a victim, what could we do in relation to that? Then we looked at it from the investigation and the detection perspective. So this is the harder side of it, what can we do about bringing people to court? We looked at the case management. This is where the whole case management was extended into this particular area. We then looked at working in partnership, acknowledging that while we are on Garda Síochána and the lead agency, other agencies can assist it, the likes of local authorities with the crime prevention through environmental design and other areas like that. And then we also looked at it through our communications plan. We had a specific communications plan around this lock up, light up, and that was a particular success. So we had a specific plan under each of those areas. What we have learned is that every one of those brought something to the table, and in the areas, some areas succeeded better than others, and we've tried to identify why. I'll ask Gertrude maybe to talk a little bit more. The predictive analytics was of enormous benefit to us. So identifying where these where these crimes happen, the days of the week, the times of the day, and then using that to influence or allocation and deployment. So putting people in these areas where the crimes were happening before they were going to happen. And then we constantly began to assess and evaluate on an almost weekly basis to continue to learn the lessons, to look at has there been changes in deployment, and look at how we could change that. Or maybe if Gertrude wants to come in relation to that, and then John.
One of the basic premises of Operation Tor was that it was based on analysis and research. Analysis of the problem, breaking the problem down. Research in terms of actually identifying transferable practice that we could apply. And obviously it was operationalised with the views and experience of operational officers. And I think that was the key to the success of Operation Tor: analysis, research, and with a good operational focus on it. I don't want to kind of repeat the things that the Deputy said, but you know, all of those strands that we talked about, all of them were actually based on analysis. So, for example, we knew that there were patterns to burglaries. We knew that there was clear spatial and temporal patterns to burglaries, and that's why we could actually recommend hotspot policing, and the evidence shows that hotspot policing is actually tremendously effective. We knew how burglaries were occurring. So, for example, if you're living in a residential property, 80% of the time people come through the front door, the back door, or the back window. We could provide tailored crime prevention advice. We knew that there was going to be rapid re-victimization in a small portion of people. That's why we could actually suggest a follow-up. We knew there was a cohort of repeat offenders. So do you see, this was how we were kind of building up. Now, we did do an evaluation, an assessment of it. And what that showed was that we were actually quite effective in many of the strands. So, for example, if you look at the crime prevention, the awareness of crime prevention actually increased. Specific crime prevention advice in terms of burglaries increased. And, you know, something like we measured in a public attitude survey of those people, there was a significant increase in people who were aware of the crime prevention advice specific to this Operation Tor, and who were acting upon it. I think we also had significant media around that as well. Actually, that was also important, you know, linking the whole crime prevention campaign media to activity on the ground as well. The way that we managed offenders. Now, we know that there's issues with our detections. Our job, I think, was to actually target the most prolific offenders. And you could actually either, for a better word, sit on them, or put them out of business by arresting them. Now, we probably didn't get the number of arrests we would like. We certainly did get some high and kind of folks in terms of detections, especially travelling criminals. But certainly what we saw from Operation Tor was a big step back in terms of the activity of prolific offenders. So what I think a really evidence-based approach, founded on research, with a good operational kind of view on it, soundly implemented, helped it.
Okay. Well, that five-strand approach, Deputy, that you describe, what other areas of policing, what other crime areas are amenable to that type of approach? For example, roads policing, other types of policing. What have you learned that you can bring to other areas now?
Well, we apply those key principles to every plan we prepare. So we consider them under those five strands. So in the area of roads policing, what can we do to prevent it? And in some areas, the likes of roads policing, the likes of, you know, policing the nighttime economy, the role that other agencies have to play in that, and other business partners. So it's not just about An Garda Síochána on its own. So I think one of the key lessons that we've learned is the role that other agencies and other partners can play in terms of messaging, in terms of nighttime economy, in terms of working with those in licensed vintners, what we can do in support of that. So we apply those principles to every policing operation, policing plan that we prepare now. But certainly the role of other agencies was a key learning for us in relation to that. And in fairness, any time we have engaged with them, they have been more than willing to assist. But I think that needs to be stronger. Crime prevention, we talked about earlier on, it's not a matter for An Garda Síochána on its own. That's a matter for everybody. And all other agencies in other jurisdictions, it's done completely differently. So a lot of work to be done in that particular area. But one of the key lessons we took out of it was working in partnership, how that's better than working on our own.
Deputy Commissioner, when you look across the 28 divisions, An Garda Síochána divisions, are there particular divisions you can look to and say that Operation Tor has been spectacularly successful, and are there divisions that need more attention, or how does it play across the country, across the 28 divisions, in terms of success of Thor?
Well, I think the reduction in burglary has been consistent across the country. I'm certainly satisfied that there was consistent application, and that came down probably to strong governance and the oversight. Certainly in the initial reduction, certainly in more recent times there may be some variation in that, and we're dealing and addressing with those on a case-by-case basis.
The other thing
Sorry,
I'd
John.
say,
Sorry, Commissioner. Yeah.
is the need to continuously evolve and adapt. There are certain elements of crime that are seasonal, and no matter how successful an operation is, you need to refocus every now and again and ensure that the effort and the resources going in is focused in the right place, and that as seasonal factors start to emerge, that you are starting to look at how that might impinge on the success of the operation, and you're getting bang for your buck, in other words, in relation to the focus of that operation. So that's a high-level learning out of it.
John, I think you wanted to...
I have oversight in relation to Operation Thor, and that involves on occasions bringing together personnel from all the divisions throughout the country into one room in my conference room. And at the last meeting, the most recent meeting, we went through the variations in detection rates, and everyone explained to everyone else why they believed they had a higher detection rate than other districts, and we discovered certain changes that could be made in divisions where there were lower detection rates and particular crimes that we could focus on. In addition to that, the Serious Crime Operations section, we've identified that at particular times of the night, people are particularly vulnerable, and there are burglary patrols, and I have numerous records of in recent nights and recent weeks where arrests have been made. In one case, for example, at 2:30 in the morning, guards going out and finding 2 people, including a female, engaged in burglaries, and then consequently finding a child left in a house not cared for, so there were child protection issues. Another car on the 24th of July, high-powered Jeep discovered doing burglaries at service stations. So it's very focused, and I think it's this coming together of all the personnel and everyone seeing what is happening in other districts and divisions that has helped to bring some consistency to
look, I think I'd like to take the opportunity to commend the women and men who are out there at the front line doing this, and indeed their supervisors. I'd like to hear more from you in maybe in committee in future about how you bring that learning to other areas of crime, and maybe to get some actual hard data from you in terms of actual number of detections by division and numbers of arrests and prosecutions. I'm very keen just to track those, and the total cost of the operation. Conscious of time,
just
so...
to inform you again for the committee that over the coming days we'll be relaunching Operation Thor with the focus for the winter months.
Okay. And I guess from an oversight point of view, I'm interested in hearing, not today because you don't have this data to hand, the actual cost of the operation, effectiveness by division, or by division would be interesting in terms of inputs and outputs in terms of our outcomes in terms of arrests and prosecutions. So maybe we'll come back to that in committee. Can I move on and talk a little bit around the nighttime economy and assaults in particular? The number of reported assaults have shown an increase in recent years, and the authority, particularly in the Strategy and Performance Committee, we've been particularly concerned by an observation of an increased number of reported assaults over the months of 2017. The target monthly threshold has not been met in any month after January. I think that's a matter of concern for us in terms of focusing on that particular offence, the offence of assault. And if things continue at the present rate, the number of assaults will exceed the 2017 target by possibly up to 15%. So I'm interested in hearing what Garda Síochána are planning to do between now and year end, to try and address the issue of assaults across the country, particularly in the context of the policing plan.
I think certainly assaults are an area that are of particular concern to us, and particularly in relation to the nighttime economy. And as we know, that as the consumption of alcohol increases, unfortunately, one of the downsides of that is the number of assaults increase also. You've outlined what the statistics are, and the action and the improvement plans that we have in place across each region are an analysis of exactly where they are taking place. And coming back to what I said earlier on, we have specific policing plans in place in key areas, working with public transport companies, working with the licensed vintners, working with the local authority, and working with both the patrons that are coming here in terms of their own responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility in this area, and we're working in partnership with all those people to address this particular issue. It is a particular concern. It is an increase. It is related to the increase in the number of people currently out in these particular areas at night, the increased consumption of alcohol. This is a well-known trend that has happened year after year. We have had earlier on this year and late last year a specific media campaign with some very positive results, where we were raising the awareness of the nighttime economy and the issues that come with that. So our work continues. We deploy our resources in these key areas, but one of the main things that we do is work in partnership with all of the agencies involved to ensure that we arrest the trend, but also that we ensure that people can go out, socialise, enjoy themselves, consume alcohol in safety and enjoy their night out. But from our perspective, we have improvement plans in all of the areas where the increase are of greatest, and that does include a critical part of that is working in partnership with other agencies.
Can I just add, you asked one of the lessons from Operation Tor, which for me was about the research analysis and the application of it. We did the similar thing with the nighttime economy, and maybe kind of looking at those 5 strands. And this is why there's such an emphasis on partnership working, because Operation Tor, quite a lot of it was within our control. So the crime prevention advice, the patrols, the focusing on the prolific offenders, quite a lot of it was in our control. If you look at dealing with assaults, especially in the nighttime economy, there's quite a lot of it actually outside of our control. So we can't focus on repeat. Can we focus on repeat offenders? There's not that many repeat offenders in terms of assaults. Can we focus on repeat victims? Actually, the data shows there's not that many repeat victims. We can certainly patrol our hotspots in terms of where on the basis of previous patterns, where we know that it's going to happen. But if you look at where the incidents are occurring, quite a lot of incidents start off from licensed premises or in and around licensed premises. So we're talking. That's why it's important to talk to licensed premises, security firms as well. It's also probably important to talk to local authorities, because if you look at some of the flashpoints, we don't control some of those flashpoints. We're talking about fast food stands, we're talking about taxi ranks. So we're talking about areas where people are trying to get out of the town centre, which is causing conflict. So burglary Tor, a lot of that was in our control. Here, we actually probably have to work a whole lot more in terms of partnership with other agencies in order to manage and control the nighttime economy. And that's, I think, where the emphasis comes from.
Just taking one strand then of nighttime economy and the explanation you've given in terms around increased consumption of alcohol, what's your level of effort in terms of enforcing the Intoxicating Liquor Act across the country and not just in Dublin? And what level of detections and prosecutions do you take?
I can provide the detailed figures in relation to that, and again we can provide them in some detail. A key aspect is the enforcement of the liquor licensing regulations and ensuring that both the consumer and the licensee act in accordance with the legislation. It is included in every district plan that that all licensed premises are visited. And that particular area, because it is where it starts, so it is important. We can provide some more detail in this particular area in relation to the key numbers on it.
Deputy, where for example your analysis is showing you particular hotspots where there are repeat instances of assault, I mean, do you go as far as objecting to licences, objecting to extensions of the closing hours? Do you engage with the local authority, for example, in terms of planning permission, opening times for fast food takeaways, location of taxi ranks? How proactive are you engaging on those issues?
Every licence that's issued on Garda Síochána are involved in a process, and many licences have been, we have objected to the renewal. We have brought cases before the court for them to be revoked. We have objected to extensions, and that happens on a daily and a weekly basis. And it is something that we're very keen on. We keep a very, very close eye. But on a weekly basis, that will be happening, the length and breadth of the country. And a district officer it is crucial to the quality of life in every district, the behaviour of people who consume alcohol, but also the people who run licensed premises. So it is a key core focus of every district in the country, and it is included in every one of the policing plans that they have in place to address this particular issue. So we can certainly provide details with the number of objections, the number of renewals, the number of extensions that we have objected to, licence we've revoked. All of that detail is available. We can provide to you in committee.
Can you include off licence as well, the off trade, because clearly there's an issue with home drinking and pre-drinking. So I'd be interested to see those. Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll, could you
just
come
add
in?
to that,
Yeah.
there is a new drugs and alcohol strategy, and the first meeting of an oversight group will be tomorrow morning, and I'm the Commissioner's nominated person to participate in that, led by the Department of Health. And the new strategy concentrates on harm reduction, but it provides this holistic approach and recognise that there are a lot of state agencies involved. If you, as I do, talk to GPs, they will tell you that because the economy is improving, they are finding that there is a lot more patients presenting with cocaine-related problems. That's economy-related. During the recession, the number of patients presenting with those sort of problems reduced considerably. So there's a lot of issues outside of policing that are at play here. The more money there is in the economy, the greater the issues are in relation to the night economy, especially the influence of drugs and alcohol.
But undoubtedly, the societal burden from alcohol-related harm is significant, socially and economically. I absolutely accept that it's not just the job of Garda Síochána, that it is a multi-agency approach. I'm keen to get the data that you've offered there, Deputy, and I'm also keen, maybe in committee again, to talk about which other partner agencies are pulling their weight and which are left, could do more, and maybe that's something we talk about again. But in conscious of time, I'm going to hand back to the Chair, so thank you.
Just before I invite Valerie to ask you some questions about sexual crime, you mentioned there that you were relaunching Thor with the focus on the winter months. Do you want to take a minute to give a message to the community, since we're talking about Operation Thor, about the risks that they should be, aware of in the context of the winter months? It's just, since you mentioned it, it seemed an opportunity.
Well, our community engagement section will engage as they have coming into winter in other months, and there will be advertisements in the media advising people about locking up and making sure that their premises are safe.
The lock up, light up message from us.
Those sort of messages, we
right.
push those out, particularly at this time of the year as winter's coming in, and they are very effective if people adhere to the advice that is given.
Okay, that's a good message for the audience today.
If I could add one further sentence, if I may, Chair. I think the darker evenings is a period that's of concern. So we do ask that campaign that we're talking about, that lock up, that light up, particularly in the early evening. That's the period of time that we want people to be most conscious of.
Okay.
Between 5 and 7.
Between 5 and 7, precisely.
Between 5 and 7 is a high point.
Okay.
Between 5 and 7 is a high point of the burglaries. And in winter months, people are able to see whether you're at home or not. Premises are easy, believe it or not, some premises aren't as secured as they should be. So light up and lock up the premise.
Okay. Thank you. Valerie is going to
Thanks,
talk
Chair.
about sexual crime with you.
Yeah, it's continuing really along some of the themes there, and just a discussion with Noel about assaults generally. I suppose I'd like to zoom in a little bit on gender-based violence and sexual violence. I think both in the 2015 and 2016 public attitude surveys, sexual offences were identified as a very high, if not the number one priority for the public. So there's obviously a great deal of concern there. And I suppose by way of context, I know you're working very closely with other agencies in implementing the national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And I have in fact here the CUSC action plan that people may be familiar with. And CUSC are the national agency, I suppose, coordinating action in this area. So I'm interested really in your role on that. But I suppose the framework in CUSC, and it reflects the framework, your approach to other crimes is probably a useful lens to look at the area. The three strands of the CUSC strategy are one, prevention, 2, provision of services to victims and holding perpetrators to account, and then 3, implementation and management and monitoring. So we've covered some of this area earlier, so just maybe to drill in. On the prevention side, what is it that Garda Síochána can do, given that you've given us the analysis of the very excellent tracking and analytical tools you can use in terms of other crimes. But these kind of crimes aren't necessarily, they're not in the public space necessarily. They're in domestic situations very often, in close, intimate relationships. So I'm just wondering if we could address prevention and also reporting detection. So briefly on prevention with the other agencies, what's the Garda Síochána's role and how much can you do?
Well, I think a forum like this is hugely important, where we talk about these things, where we make people aware, and we get the discussion in relation to sexual violence out from under the table and up onto the top of it, and that we're clear and we accept the issues in relation to this. Domestic violence is a huge issue, and it is a huge issue across Irish society, but historically it is something we never spoke about, and sexual violence was something similar. So I think a forum like this, where we discuss it, we discuss the dangers and the risk, and hopefully we give confidence to people to come and speak to Garda Síochána. We have it up on the top of our priority because of the heinous type of crime that it is, because of the damage that it causes to families. It is hugely destructive. So we need to do everything, and we are doing everything that we possibly can to increase confidence in Garda Síochána, to increase confidence in all of the other agencies that are in this area, increase confidence in the community, in the knowledge that all agencies are working together to address it. So I think one of the key things from a crime prevention perspective that we want to do and that we are doing is talking about it, keeping it in the public, keeping the focus on it, and continually working to give people confidence in the agencies working in this area. Again, I might ask Gertrude maybe to talk about what the statistics tell us, and then again maybe John can talk about some of the work we're doing with the other agencies. We have a team involved in special crime operations. We have a team of special detectives in there dealing with that particular issue, and that cascades then out into each of the Garda divisions.
Could we take it in steps and maybe look at reporting first? Is low reporting an issue in this area, and what trends are you seeing at the moment?
In general, the studies that we've seen over the years suggest that there is low reporting. So in terms of the year so far, we have seen an increase in the number of recorded incidents. So we're up 7% so far, and that's to the end of August in terms of the incidents. So that's most up to date.
7%.
7%. So that I know
so
you're
getting higher throughout the year.
That's going. Yeah. So we're heading in the right direction. I just want to put a word of caution here.
Yeah.
Because while we see a kind of an increase, the issue is it because more people are reporting it? Is it because we're recording it better, as well as the reporting? Or is it that those two things aren't shifting at all, but there's more sexual offences? So it's actually very difficult to kind of understand fully those changes. We're hoping that that plus 7% is because of better reporting, and also of people feeling kind of encouraged that they can come forward. And I think certainly the feedback from the voluntary organisations is that the way that the Garda organisation is dealing with sexual offences is much more positive. And I know, surveys and stats aren't the most exciting things at times, but I have said before
but you've
here,
identified an important issue there, and is there anything you can do analytically?
But I'm coming back to this. I have mentioned at this forum before that I do think that there is the requirement to conduct something similar to the previous sexual assault and violence in Ireland study. It's going to be an important mechanism for us to actually understand the experiences of individuals in Ireland in terms of the sexual assaults, but also that's where we're going to get the prevalence rate, and that's where we're going to get a better sense of the reporting rate. The Savvy report was done some time ago now, and I think
Okay.
we need something similar like that. I think it is it's not something I think Garda Síochána can do.
Okay. And I think we'll be interested in coming back to some of that again. In the reporting area, have you, in the area of services to victims of crime, are you beginning to see any association in terms of that generating confidence in victims or survivors in coming forward, if they have confidence in how they will be engaged with when they do report?
I think the feedback we're getting from victims does certainly demonstrate greater confidence. And I think it goes back to the conversation that we had earlier on. There is more work to be done.
Yeah.
We have made progress this year. It's important we build on that and we continue to improve. And we continue to, in the background, try and understand why people have recorded the three questions that Gertrude raised earlier on. Need to understand them. But what is within our control is the services we, as Garda Síochána, and we, as working with the other services in the area providing support to victims. That is one thing that we have in our control, and that's something that we are continually trying to evolve, make sure it improves, constantly working on. So certainly, the indications are at this stage. We're aware, we know from our surveys that the services have improved, and that the feeling among victims has improved. That's something we will continue to work on.
Okay.
We will continue to evolve.
The perpetrator is also obviously involved in this instance. In terms of crime prevention, and I'm conscious of the debate in the media in the last number of weeks, have the Gardaí got any message out there to the general public in terms of reporting and importance of reporting and support that they would receive from the Gardaí?
I suppose I can't stress the importance of reporting these crimes to Garda Síochána. I can't stress the importance of looking for help. And there are lots of agencies working very, very hard every day to support vulnerable victims in these particular areas. And the assurance that I give on behalf of Garda Síochána is that we are determined to provide the service to every victim of crime, in particular in these particularly horrible crimes. We will continue to improve, and certainly we're working very hard with the other agencies. So the key message that I would want to give to people is talk to somebody about it, but most importantly, come forward and report to the agencies involved, in particular in Garda Síochána.
Okay. I think that's an important message, and that's heard by everybody. Moving on from reporting then to detection, and I suppose I'm a little concerned when I hear earlier the description of detections, including situations where allegations may be withdrawn or victims don't turn up in court. Is that a feature that happens in this area of crime more than other areas?
Well, there's if the CSO do a report which across the whole criminal justice system. So what they're doing is they're following incidents from when they're recorded with us all the way through to prosecution and whatever the verdicts are. And one of the things they'll talk about, or other analysts will talk about, is the decay rate, the rate at which the incident falls off as you travel through the criminal justice system. And one of the issues is that if you look at sexual offences have the highest, I think, fall-off rate as you go through the criminal justice system.
So what we're hearing is the detection figures need to be read in that context.
Well, no, the detections
Okay.
are the detections
I suppose
that you
that's
see.
back to
But
the
I think
counting
my
rules
understanding
issue.
of your question
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
through the criminal justice
Yeah.
system. So if we are talking about through the criminal justice system and the drop-off,
Okay.
the drop-off comes, so for example, people going to court, you'll see a significant drop-off
Okay,
there.
I'm with
But
you,
the point
Gertrude,
is
yeah.
that's still counted as a detection.
As a detection,
That's
yeah.
the critical point.
I suppose it's about understanding when we're reading the statistics what detection means, and I do accept that you referred earlier to the counting rules. So that's probably something we'll come back again to. The third strand of the CUSC report, which is, I suppose, particularly important, is the whole area of implementation, monitoring, data, research, the actual management of crime management in these areas. And I was wondering, actually, could you talk us through, by way of context, how, and I would like you to use an example, actually, how the Garda, how Garda Síochána goes about implementing legislation, putting policy and procedures in place when, for example, a new piece of legislation comes in. So back to the area we're talking about, we new legislation only this year in terms of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017. I think it was enacted in February, commenced in March. So presumably you're beginning to implement at this stage. And I think there are a number of new offences identified in that legislation. Some concerning the abuse of children, including online grooming, and also in the area of prostitution, in the criminalisation of the purchase or the demand for sexual services as opposed to the provision. So my first question is, and maybe giving that as an example, how is that piece of legislation being implemented? How do you pass the required knowledge and training to all the Gardaí and members on the ground? And how do you monitor through data?
Okay. I'll maybe hand to John in a couple of minutes in relation to the specific example. But at the outset, at a general level, when new legislation is introduced, it goes through what we call our policy development, implementation and monitoring section. Mm-hmm. So they will examine the legislation and they will develop new policy for it. So what is the new Garda policy? How does it affect old policy? How does it affect other existing policies within the organisation? And there is a new policy developed. That is then issued to the organisation, and it is passed then to the policy holder in terms of a monitoring piece. So in this particular case, with the policy that's implemented, it's handed over to Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll in Special Crime Operations, and he's responsible for the monitoring and the oversight of it. If it requires a specific training programme, that issue was particularly assessed. It's then passed to the Garda College, who will develop a specific training programme. Some cases, it's sufficient that legislation, it's just by way of information. So we'll issue the new policy. It'll be issued by way of HQ circular. It'll go out to every member of the organisation. It'll be available on the Garda portal. The 15-minute briefing time that's provided to every person in advance is used as a particular tool, a particular mechanism to provide this information on updated legislation, updated policy, how it has been developed, how it has been changed, make people aware of what the new HQ circular is. But in the more complex areas, there is a specific training programme developed, and that may go to specialist areas or to the entire organisation, depending on what that is. In the area of domestic violence, we have developed a new policy on it, and every member of the organisation will receive training because of both the change in the policy, the importance of this particular area, and an acceptance and an acknowledgement by the organisation that we need to improve in this area. Here's the new policy, and that is a specific plan. Maybe if John wants to talk about the specifics that you mentioned.
Sorry, before we go into the specifics, I think it's important we may go to the general as well and the more strategic in this context in relation to policy development, standard approach, consistently standard approach across not just criminal policy areas, but also like every other area of our organisation. And we have recently established a policy unit with that in mind. They'll become a repository for all our policies. They will ensure that policies are updated in a timely fashion. They'll be the holders of our most recent policy in whatever given area there might be. And the first piece of work that they're going to do is to ensure that all areas of policy are owned by somebody at Executive Director or Assistant Commissioner rank. And they have set about that task at the moment, and we'd hope that, over the coming weeks and months that we will get some clarity around that area, and then that we can start to ensure that not just in the areas of criminal law and whatever it might change in the statute, that we get consistency of approach to the development and then to the upkeep and updating of all our policies.
And does that include then the process dimension and the piece that the Garda will know how to record data on Pulse, that Pulse is actually equipped to receive the data, that the data will knit into the requirements of the CUSC strategy around some of the crimes mentioned there? Is that all owned, will that be owned by the same person?
What will ensure is that the policy owner, all aspects of that policy, the policy owner will be responsible for ensuring that the policy is updated and that whatever it says is being done across the board.
Okay.
And that individual office will have responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably moving more broadly, but back to this particular piece of legislation, I wonder, could you give us an update on where you are in relation to implementation? Because the legislation will be due to review within 3 years, so I suppose it's important to get going quickly.
Sorry, that we need to understand about new legislation is, very often we do very in-depth investigation files, we complete very in-depth investigation files and we submit them, and there's huge frustration that they end up with no prosecution. And very often that is because we don't have legislation that maybe exists in other jurisdictions. So if you take an area like human trafficking, in the early years our legislation was very poor. Some of the files, extensive files that were done at that time, if they were now submitted, would end up in prosecutions because we now have legislation in that area. If you take an area like Ireland doesn't have any legislation relating to smuggling under the Palermo Convention, every other country in Europe does. That's frustrating for us. What it would mean if that came in is that many of these files that we send off to the DPP that come back with no prosecution, if we did have smuggling legislation which would mirror other jurisdictions, we would then find that there is a significant increase in the number of criminal prosecutions. So in a lot of areas, what the impact will be, files will go in as they did previously, but now we have offences, a greater range of offences, so the likelihood of a prosecution being instituted is more significant.
In Northern Ireland, similar legislation in respect of the purchase of sexual services was enacted in 2015, and I think maybe commencement with that for them was about February, and the first arrest was in about October, because obviously it takes time to embed. Has Garda Síochána made any arrests in this space at this point?
I can't give you that information today, but we can certainly
and is that something that your systems are ready to monitor and collect the data on from the get-go?
It will be possible in terms of examining criminal charges under particular headings to see how many charges there are. But one of the benefits we have now with the Garda National Protective Services Bureau is that it has an oversight role in relation to a lot of this area of criminality. And specific units within that bureau will be monitoring the use of this legislation. And we removed the human trafficking investigations, for example, out of the Garda National Immigration Bureau, put them into the Protective Services Bureau so that we'd have a victim-centred approach. But that bureau is now supported with the personnel who can monitor legislation and ensure that it is being implemented and being implemented consistently. Throughout.
I think that new piece of legislation might be a good model that we might take up again, just to follow that policy process, systems, data monitoring, and indeed contributing to the review of the legislation in 3 years. It may be a useful one to look at as we go forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm a little bit confused at the end of that exchange. Have you devised a policy in relation to that specific piece of legislation? Because you spoke about having new charges for files, but is there something that would empower frontline officers to actually intervene in a different way because of the new, which I think was Valerie's question?
Well, typically what will happen is a HQ directive will be prepared as a result of new legislation being enacted. Now, there is a range of HQ directives being prepared within the Protective Services Bureau. I have one on my desk before I came out of here going through it. And I just have to verify what the directive is and what instruction we have issued.
I have the domestic abuse intervention policy here, which it's an excellent document.
Yes.
So will we see something like that? Maybe not.
Something along those lines. But aside from that, we'll have a specific HQ directive explaining how it is to be implemented, and that is typically how we advise our members.
From a process improvement point of view, we might keep going. Thank you very much.
I think I hadn't intended to discuss the. I'm asking the questions about data quality, just to show we're moving along on the agenda. I hadn't intended to discuss the checkpoint reports because, as you know, we have a piece of work ourselves coming along. But there is a connection in the conversation that I'd like to make. So I'm not talking about the report as such, but it seemed to me, and that's why I focused on Valerie's question to you, it seemed to me that Assistant Commissioner O'Sullivan found a couple of things about your policy. One is that it was a bit impenetrable because it was very long. And the other one was in relation to the fixed charge notices, because legislation is complex. So, there's cause and effect there. But also that when the legislation changed, that maybe the policy didn't change quick enough. So just from that point of view, I don't really want to talk about checkpoints, but it's really the question about your new policy unit, Commissioner, is whether your new policy unit, is expected to remedy those defects in a general way across, so that you're more agile when new legislation comes in.
Exactly. That's one of the main, I suppose, responsibilities of that section will be to ensure. Now, there won't be the experts, but they will have an approach to how you should develop policy, and to make it understandable, to put it into English that people can read and understand readily, so that it's useful to the people at the front line, that they can immediately understand what they need to be doing, and so that consistency of approach is one of the main responsibilities that will be on that office, as well as then once the policy has been developed, and they won't be the policy experts, they will be depending on the policy owners to fill that much in, but they'll be going back to them telling them,
policy publisher.
Yes, there's far too much in there, you need to bring it down a piece, and you need to have it consistent language, consistent approach, so that when people pick something up, they know where to go if they want it's going to be readily available.
All right, thank you.
I think, Chair, in the example you discussed there, I think it is actually a good link between what we're talking about. In the particular case of the MAT and the FCN, the policy owner is Michael Finn. So he will ensure that the new HU circulars are prepared, that the legislation has been transposed into, readable procedures for our people on the ground. He will be responsible then for ensuring that that's implemented consistently across the ground. The people that the Commissioner talks about will provide that support to the policy owner. Okay. So I think, it is a good example maybe to illustrate how it's joined up and how it's connected.
And generally speaking, a new piece of law takes some time to come through the bureaucracy. So would you be developing the policy, or do you wait until it's enacted?
Well, we wait until it's enacted, certainly, because I suppose our previous history has been that it very often changes in the latter stages. Okay. So a lot of the work, then has to be redone. So it is a case now. Very often it's published, and there is a time before it is actually enacted. So it is certainly in that piece we are getting ready and preparing all of the stuff. One of the key things that we have found over the years is pulse. Where there's changes that have to be made to a pulse system, that does take time, and that can be a challenge. But certainly, the last couple of years we've been trying to iron out any of those bumps.
Okay, thank you. On the heading of data quality, I was struck by the conversation between my colleagues and yourselves about Operation Thor based on analytics. And some of you know, Gertjan in particular knows that I have a bit of a passion for predictive analytics in my previous life. I suppose my question is about in terms of Thor, since you raised it, and the hotspots, how confident were you about the quality of the data? Because clearly the analysis is only as good as the data, and therefore, by extension, your hotspots and your targeting.
Well, I mean, there's no two ways around it. We had to do a bit of cleaning of the data. So when we pulled down the data, there were issues there. For example, address data or location data in terms of the latitude and longitude of the incident. So what happens is that the analysts do actually spend a bit of time cleaning the data, which is, on the one hand, frustrating for us, but on the other hand, slows us down. So it's a whole process of actually getting timely data in terms of supporting operational activity. So clearly, one of the areas that we want to kind of improve on is, not only the classifications, but on things like ensuring that we have unique locations and accurate locations. That's a big issue for us as well. So it is an issue. It does slow us down a wee bit, but I wouldn't dismiss the analysis that comes out at the end of it. I think that analysis is still valuable in terms of supporting operational policing, but we do need to clean the data.
I think, in addition, once they provide the information, it is validated then on a regular basis. So this is what the predictive element of it. Well, then that's compared with the actual at a later stage, and it's compared. And while there are variations, it's certainly the analysis stands up and certainly confirms what had been predicted in the first instance.
So that brings me, I think, to still under that heading of data quality, to the points you made about training and reminding people about classification and the crime counting rules and detections and so on. Could you tell me a little bit more about not what you're going to do, but how do you know that they will change their behaviour as a result of you engaging? It's a conversation you had earlier, I think it was with Judith. How do you evaluate whether you've had any impact when you bring people in and you say, these are the rules, these are the detection rules, these are the counting rules? How do you measure the impact of your, whether it's a training intervention or a mentoring intervention or whatever?
Well, I suppose Gretchen touched on it to some extent in terms of the work that's been done by the analysis service. That provides us some evidence as to whether there has been any improvement in the quality of the data. The inspectorate report there a number of years ago pointed to the likes of classification, reclassification and detections. We ran a specific pilot initiative, and certainly I can talk in some detail about what that will be like into the future and how certainly the future will be. But in terms of evaluating it, we're constantly using the data. We're constantly using it. The analysis services are using it on an almost daily basis, and they provide information where there are concerns from their perspective in relation to that information is provided to us. I suppose there's a constant monitoring and an oversight of it. I suppose
I'm thinking more about supervision and verification, because I mean, we have had issues around classification, and I'm going to talk in a minute very briefly about the homicide report. So it's more about how do you know you're getting better?
Can I?
When we have the CSO suspending the publication again, and that's not something that it's in anyone's interest that it should continue. So how do you know you're getting better?
I know Gretchen has detail on this, and Assistant Commissioner Finn has detail around this. I suppose there is a very, very specific plan that we have been running a pilot initiative in the northern region. That will be extended. It will be extended in November. We expect, and again, this is IT dependent, so the dates may shift on this, but we are expecting that around the end of January next year, that pulse classification, reclassification and detections will be done by one unit. It will be done by GISC in Mayo, and that it will be locked down elsewhere. So there is a quality control unit at GISC. So the original classification is done there. There is a data quality team that's in there, and they will have responsibility for that. So it'll all be done at a single point in January, February.
Right.
So
well,
I think that gives it that now.
We look forward to that. No, if I go there, I'll be here for ages, because I could talk about data to Gertchen for a long time. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that we've received the report in relation to the homicide classifications. We still have some questions, and I think that won't come as a surprise to you. So what we decided to do this morning is to refer it for detailed engagement with you to the Policing Performance Committee, and Judith will take that up with you at the next meeting. But I do have a couple of questions for the record, which I think are important in terms of the audience and in terms of community confidence. So the first thing I need you to do, and you'll understand the context for this, is to confirm that this report that we have now is final, and that it has been signed off both on the analysis side of the House and in the investigation side of the House, right across the piece. And if maybe you could confirm that that's the case, Commissioner.
Yes, I can confirm that's the case. Yeah.
Thank you. And the second question is, again, it's formally, but it's enormously important for community confidence and for families and victims. Can I ask you to formally confirm that all of the cases that have been included in that report have been investigated in a manner which is compliant with Article 2 of the Human Rights Convention, notwithstanding that they may have been classified differently along the way?
Yes, I can confirm that also, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's really reassuring, and as I say, we'll take up the detail in committee, because quite a bit of it is is of confidential nature in any event. My final point is just a hark back to our roads policing meeting earlier in the year, and it doesn't quite belong here, but if I don't do it here, I'll forget. We've got some follow-up material from you, and again, that has led to more questions, and again, we'll take those up in committee. But I do want to pick up one particular point, if you don't mind. On the 31st of August, Garda Síochána issued a press release announcing that fees for documentation in relation to fatal and serious injury road traffic collisions have been reviewed, and that a new policy would be introduced as of January 17, whereby there would be a waiver of fees by the Garda Síochána in relation to collisions where a fatality had occurred, and in cases of collisions resulting in serious injury, fees would be capped at a cost of €1,000. But it took about 6 months for you to issue the directive, which is back to that policy discussion we had earlier. It issued on the 29th of June. So I guess what we need to know for us, but also for the information of the victims and of their families, what steps have you taken to remedy the mistake that was made during that 6 months of continuing to collect fees, notwithstanding that your policy had changed? Could you help us with that?
I might maybe ask Assistant Commissioner Finn can give us the details on it.
Chair, as a result of that meeting and following from that, we did an analysis of all of the cases where we charged people who hadn't for the fees when we shouldn't have, and identified 28 cases.
How many?
28 cases.
28?
Yeah, 28 cases with a total refund of €16,820 was the sum of what we should have refunded to those people. As of today, I've confirmed that with our finance department that 19 of those applications with a value of $11,240 are being repaid as of right now. And I have another, there's 8 where there's some clarification about who exactly has to be paid back. Is it the solicitor or who is? But I have that in hand in relation to the whole 28 of them, Chair, as a result of what the issue raised the last 8-hour meeting.
You said the word application. Does that mean people had to ask you?
No, I would say people had applied. I was able to track back to see who wrote in, made an application for the abstract. That's what I mean by 28 abstracts.
So you were in a position to identify those that had paid in excess of the cap?
Exactly.
And you took the initiative to refund?
Correct.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. We're moving on to our next agenda item, which I think is Moling, in relation to Dr. Shannon's report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Okay, just a few minutes looking at some of the outcomes of Jeffrey Shannon's report in relation to the operation of Section 12 of the Child Care Act in 1991, which relates to the authorisation for Gardaí to remove a child from the carer's family or family. And there were, his report, if you recall, looked at the appropriateness, proportionality and legality of Section 12 removals of children by Gardaí. And there were a lot of very positive findings by the Shannon report in relation to the manner in which the Gardaí undertook their responsibilities, their statutory responsibilities. The type of observations spoke about the sensitivity of the Gardaí and the compassion of the Gardaí in terms of how they dealt with them, talk about that there was careful consideration given to the circumstances and available evidence before they undertook the action, that there was elements of the section not being used in an overzealous manner and so on by the Gardaí, all very, very positive. But they also found that there were a number of instances that were issues of concern to them, particularly in relation back to that old perennial of data. Was one of the areas in relation to pulse, particularly the type of information that's gathered. They had concerns in relation to interagency training or interagency working and in relation to training. And there were 17 recommendations in total that the Shannon report included in their report. So what I'd be interested in is if you might share with us the extent to which action has been taken on those recommendations. What action has been taken, what action is anticipated to be taken, what sort of issues were identified during the course of it in the context of implementation.
Okay, I'll take the earlier part of the question, if that's okay, Molly, and then again, Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll can come in. He attended a meeting yesterday in relation with with this in relation to the other agencies, in relation to progressing a lot of the recommendations. But I think the context of this report is particularly important. And it was a report that An Garda Síochána commissioned following the publication of the Logan report. And I think every report that's issued always identifies areas of improvement. And I think that's important. And we see this, we look at this very positively. We're constantly looking to improve, and we constantly accept that there is always room to improve. And I think the key positive note that we took from this report was the one you allude to, was the use of Section 12. And I think that is hugely important to us as an organisation, but also to the wider community, that in the words of Geoffrey Shannon, we used and we treated children sensitively in this regard. I think another area that report identified was in relation to racial profiling, and he found no evidence of that. So again, I think that's a really important message. So the high-level areas that he was called in to address were both of those, and in both of those he provided comfort to the organisation. In relation, yes, of course, pulse is an area, data quality is an area, and it continues to recur. We have engaged Professor Shannon. He is working with us in terms of the implementation. He is on our implementation team. We have had engagement with the Garda College in terms of the training aspects of it. We have had some discussions and meetings with TUSLA, and I might ask John maybe to expand on that, because I know that he was at a particular meeting where timelines were laid out in terms of the interagency cooperation. We have agreed to co-locate with TUSLA, and again that's a significant development. Maybe John can provide more detail on that.
Okay, well, the day before yesterday I met the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs along with Dr. Shannon and the Ombudsman for Children, and we discussed the implementation of the recommendations. There is already a decision made that a number of those recommendations will be dealt with by an oversight strategic committee that I jointly chair along with TUSLA. So we're working on them. We put particular timelines on other of those recommendations, particularly in relation to the sharing of information, the identification of blocks in terms of legislation that may be impeding the sharing of information. So there's a body of work that is being done in relation to that, and we will be reporting back within about 2 or 3 months. And then there are other dates that have been set for additional meetings where we'll go back to the Minister for Children and address these issues again. The whole business of the best way to co-locate and how that should be done is being discussed. There's already agreement that a person from TUSLA will be within the Protective Services Bureau shortly and will be examining all the issues involved and helping to develop the nature of that relationship into the future. But each of the recommendations has been progressed to a particular level. I don't have the detail of all of them here.
Yeah,
but
I don't expect. Do I take it, John, that you've accepted all the recommendations?
There are recommendations that might be problematic. It's a simple recommendation like having car seats in every patrol car for children. To actually do that, you need a whole range depending on the age of a child and whatever. So there are recommendations that are difficult to implement. It's not that we don't want to implement them, but the practicalities of it, and that's just one example.
Yeah, there were some significant ones, and maybe just as a starting point, you might maybe like to focus on on the area of training, because there was one of the key recommendations, the need for comprehensive training in child protection. That was one of the key ones. So I'm just interested, for example, in relation to the level of training currently provided in the area, what training is planned, particularly in relation to the point which a number of your colleagues referred to earlier this afternoon, the rollout of the protected services units. So I'm interested, is there a structured training in place?
There is discussions taking place about joint training and the training in relation to the interviewing. There's a course starting very shortly in relation to that, so there's personnel going on that. Again, I don't have the precise detail of it here.
No, I'm just interested in the broad framework. Is it
Yeah.
focused? Is it structured? And to what extent does it address each of the individual divisions? Are there key personnel that are there? What form of framework does the training take?
Well, again, there is a decision made to develop a particular child protection unit within the Garda National Protective Services Bureau, and there is a superintendent in charge of that. So all of that area is being addressed currently, and the issue of training is a priority in all of that in that area.
All of the new recruits will go through a specific training program that is being developed with the professor. All of our people in our specialist units will provide detailed, more specialist training. Okay. So the training will be provided as set out in the recommendations of it. It will begin in Templemore. So every member of Garda recruits that comes through, they will have received specific training in this particular area. So it's at both ends, both at the general training for all our new people, but also in the specialist areas.
And I anticipate there'll be an evaluation of that training and its impact and so on. One of the interesting things was the report noted that there were 31 instances of a Section 12 removal of child that were misclassified back to the data area, and it commented that Pulse was unable to give a consistent and accurate picture of Section 12 use. And I was just wondering, firstly, how did those 31 misclassifications take place, and what sort of assurance can you give that necessary changes have been made to either the Pulse system or the manner in which the information is inputted that will prevent it from occurring again?
Sorry. No, the Protective Services Bureau has engaged with the IT section. There is a specific date that has been given to them to put a fix in relation to this. It involved a menu of options, and we had to eliminate some of the options that were there so as to ensure that the information will be captured in an appropriate way. Instruction has issued in any event in advance of that, and there is a constant monitoring by the Protective Services Bureau to ensure that those errors won't occur. As far as I can recall, the date is actually in January, and that's the earliest date that the fix can be done by the IT section. But meanwhile, it will be constantly monitored to ensure that no other record is improperly recorded. Now, Dr. Shannon himself emphasised the extent of the Pulse data that he examined in relation to hundreds of thousands of records, and he himself pointed out that this was a very minor issue in that context, and we are working closely with him. And as I say, the fix identified. And
I take that point. The fact that he drew attention to it and highlighted did raise some questions in relation to confidence in the data that was produced. The key issue arising from it is the sort of assurance that you can give that there will be no recurrence of that, and whether that assurance, whether you're more comfortable with that assurance after the IT fix, or that you're very comfortable currently with it. I'm not quite sure.
We're comfortable that if anybody wants to make that error, that it would be immediately identified in advance of the actual fix being put in place. And we will continue discussing with the IT section to try and advance the fix to an earlier date. But obviously, it has to fit in with the schedule that they have in relation to other amendments to the Pulse system.
It does feed into the earlier points. We touched on the data quality across a number of the areas that we have discussed. The single point of data entry in January will address a lot of these issues. So there will be single point of entry in the Garda Information Service Centre in Castlebar from the end of January. It coincides with a release where we're making other changes to improve the quality in other areas, but it'll be a single point of entry. They will get a lot of training from the likes of the analysis service, the likes of the traffic people, the likes of people in John's particular area, so they understand all of this. But I think the key message that we want to give here today is that the single point of data entry should address a lot of the opportunities. At the moment, every member of An Garda Síochána does his own data entry. That's now down coming to a single centre. So I think that will, in terms of classification, reclassification, detections, that will provide a lot of comfort to us as an organisation as to the quality of our data from that point forward.
I think it's very important that Dr. Shannon was given access to the members of the Garda Síochána, and he interviewed all of them to get their views on the implementation of that section. And, you know, what he has found is that members of the Garda Síochána are implementing it in the manner intended, that they have the best interest of the child at heart. And I can tell you, when I was in charge of the Garda National Immigration Bureau during the EU presidency, there was a huge concern with my staff who work at Dublin Airport in relation to the number of children that they were encountering. Over 50 in each of the last 3 years I was in GNIB, where they found cause to contact the health service and put a child into care. During the EU presidency, I offered to, and was provided with a facility by the Department of Justice to host a meeting of the representatives of member states throughout Europe who came to Dublin to help put together guidelines for border guards throughout Europe. And that was done through Frontex, and throughout that meeting it was highlighted that Ireland were best among many of the countries who participated in terms of their proactivity in identifying children that were vulnerable and needed to be, where there needed to be further attention before they could be let into the country and placed in the hands of people who purported to be parents in some cases where they were not.
That's certainly reassuring to hear in terms of in terms of comparatives with other jurisdictions, and I know that our own Policing Strategy and Performance Committee have been engaging in this issue. Now, one of their concerns, and it's one that you identified yourself in terms of your responses to that issue, in terms of interagency cooperation and the challenges that's faced, and the challenges that you're facing ahead of this particular report. And you've identified the issue now in terms of the co-location of TUSLA's staff with your own staff. Are you confident that that would have a significant impact in terms of the overall effectiveness of the Garda role, and indeed the sort of broader child issue?
Yes, indeed, and there are a number of options there, and Dr. Shannon has visited a number of locations in the UK. There's a particularly good facility in Fermanagh, and he also went to New York, where he describes as the Rolls-Royce example of how this should operate. So we are actively engaged with him along with TUSLA to see what is the best option, and all of those options are being examined. And in the course of our meeting the day before yesterday, he was very anxious that we would deal with the data-related issues and the sharing of information in advance of coming to firm conclusions in terms of the best way for us to operate together. But there is an oversight strategic group, as I say, that I chair jointly with a senior official in TUSLA, and these matters are being progressed through that body as well.
I think that's very encouraging, and indeed the structure that you put in place in relation to the ongoing linkage with Dr. Shannon on the issue, I think, is also encouraging. Thank you very much, Chair.
Just if I may, Chair, just on one further point. We have had co-location in other areas. So it is something that is in place in Garda Síochána, and it's something that works well. So the precedent is there, and certainly I think it has worked well in those areas. So there's no concerns from that regard.
Thank you. Just a small follow-up question again on the data quality piece. I suppose it's more the behavioural bit. My recollection is that Dr. Shannon spoke about the richness of data in some cases and the sparsity of data in others. Now, fixing pulse, mandatory data fields and centralisation in Castlebar won't fix that, because clearly the call taker can only record what the officer on the ground says. So could you just talk to me a little bit about how you'll address that particular concern? Because a few places he commented on the absence of data, which he wasn't saying things were wonderful, it's simply he didn't have the data in all cases to make an assessment. And some of that is going to be down to human behaviour in terms of what the officers will ask the call takers to record. It's not a classification point, it's the richness that he spoke about. Could you?
In that particular case, the incident will be created by GISC, and it will be referred to the first line supervisor. So a member of Garda Síochána that provides the information, if there's outstanding information not provided, the incident is referred to that individual supervisor who then will ensure that that is done and that the additional information is provided, is reverted back then to GISC, and it will be addressed at that stage. Okay. It's what we call a review clarification. It will also be available to district officers, so it will form part of the performance and accountability framework that superintendents do. So they will have line of sight of this on a daily basis.
And we look forward to you linking it eventually to the performance, accountability and learning framework at individual level in due course. Thank you for that. Noel has a follow-up question.
Sorry, Chair, just a follow-up on that one, Deputy. Who in your executive team has line management responsibility for GISC in Castlebar? And the supplementary then is, given that you're going to have a single point of data entry, are you satisfied that the level of service in that GIS is actually able to meet this 24/7? Are guards been hanging on the phone, waiting to get through, offline, not able to work? Or are you satisfied that you have actually got the level? And what kind of service standards and KPIs have you got in place?
Again, I'll ask Assistant Commissioner Finn to join me in this in terms of providing some of the detail, because at the minute he has responsibility for that. It does sit within that corporate services piece. There are very, very clear defined KPIs in terms of call taking that will be answered. The bar is set quite high for them.
Well, maybe Assistant Commissioner Finn might just give us some idea as to what the KPI is, and is it met, or what's the performance?
Yeah, that's under the fall under my remit at the moment, Noel. There's a very high standard there, and they publish on a weekly basis what their performance is in relation to their expected frequency or the capacity to answer the calls within the 90-second time frame. Indeed, over the last 2 months, we've procured an additional 35 additional staff for GISC, so that not only will we be able to improve on the data quality side of it, but we also be able to improve on the call taking, the response that we've been providing to our own guards ringing in, because that has been an issue in the past. But 35 additional people gone in and another 24 in the pipeline. So I think that should certainly improve the response rates, because it is linked. Obviously, we want our guards to ring GISC and to get through there quickly and to put on those calls very fast. We don't want them going off creating themselves, because the quality of our data falls if the members are doing it themselves. So our goal at the moment is 95%. That 95% of our calls are created by GISC. Obviously, if members were suffering that delay, which they were in the past, then that was dropping. But the extra 35 staff we got in has certainly raised the bar again, and I'm confident that.
So, for example, Assistant Commissioner, if GISC have a target of answering phone calls from Garda within 90 seconds, what kind of percentage do you get? And how is that over the 24/7, night times and weekends?
Over the 24/7, in fact, we publish it for the entire week, so that our members can see if they are putting on, with say, incidents that are not priority. They can see when the capacity is great and their chances of getting through are, they won't have difficulty.
Can you give us, I'm conscious of time, but can you just give us a feel for what's it like? What percentage, roughly, get answered within the 90 seconds?
I don't actually have that percentage for you right now, but I will bring it back to you at the next meeting. But I know it's at a very high level, and with the publishing the data on a weekly basis, we can see where the peaks and troughs are. So that, for the non-urgent calls, we can avoid them and encourage members. Look, if you're creating a match checkpoint, ring in later when your chance of getting through won't be delaying.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Assistant Commissioner. I think we'll be interested particularly in that from a match checkpoints point of view, because it seems to be part of the reasons advanced by Assistant Commissioner Sullivan for
I'm aware of that.
some of the issues. So it's, it's all of a piece.
Yeah.
Finally, on our agenda, Bob Collins is going to ask you a couple of questions on the Commissioner's monthly report. Bob.
Thanks, Chairperson. Agus tasgwyl med tacht condera an crenne ni meg mór an ceisna le choragam ort ach ag dú sam a bhailim coalition made a táráite han agus streslí in the radam nó that Queen Gachrahart agus gemeinte di divisionachas na lagus it a love. Commissioner, your monthly report this month contains some really interesting information in terms of achievements of the organisation over the period under review, which I think will make interesting reading when it is made publicly available, because it captures the range of significant activities of the organisation and also some striking achievements of individuals within the organisation in the period. One of the things we touched on before in relation to that report was perhaps the value of including is, as well as some of the achievements, perhaps a note on some of the challenges. I don't mean a mea culpa, but an indication of the kind of internal environmental challenges that the organisation faces in going about its work. And I wonder, would you look at that and reassure us that that is something that you will think about and perhaps incorporate in an early report?
Of course, I think we're open. We're data rich. Whether we can improve on the way we, I suppose, store and retrieve our data, and it's important that I think that where we have challenges, that we have to be upfront about them and speak our minds about them. And I think where we have success, equally, we should be putting it out there. So I see no issue with that, and I will take it away.
Thank you. One of the things that you say in this month's report is that the overtime budget is already 53% over budget, or overtime expenditure is 53% over budget at this stage, which obviously is not a sustainable position on a continuing basis. And I wonder if you would just comment on that, but also if you could offer some reassurance that that won't have operational implications for the rest of the year.
Yes, well, Joe Nugent can come in here to give more detail, but I'm aware that a certain element is pay related. Our overtime budget is already has to go to a parading time that was built into the last pay negotiation deal, which in effect is not there for our use. It has to be paid as part of the 15-minute parading time that all members are now required to do before they go on duty. So that has taken a big chunk out of our discretionary piece, if you will, and we're very anxious to ensure that in as much as we can work and do our operations like Operation Thor and all these very successful operations out of given resources and out of ensuring that we use, say, our rostering arrangements to get best bang for our buck in that regard. But there will be times in relation to, say, organised crime and the prevention of what John spoke about earlier in relation to preventing deaths. That's an ongoing demand. I think it's important that we continue to work in that space, and we have been in consultation with the department in relation to that situation. But if there's any more detail, Joe can provide it in relation to maybe the plans from here to the end of the year in relation to how we intend to get to the 31st of December.
Yeah, clearly it's a matter that we've been in regular discussion with the department over recent months, because we're not just seeing it now. This has clearly been an issue that's been reflected. We've been at a financial level, we've been working with the regional assistant commissioners and by extension with chief superintendents and superintendents to put in place proper controls to ensure that the money is being spent where it absolutely is essential, and recognise the priorities that are there. Nonetheless, as you say, Bob, there are priorities that we must absolutely need, and the protection of the community is right at the centre and the heart of that issue. We have worked with the department and provided them with more detail to discuss how we address this issue between now and year end. They're looking at this matter in that sense, and we'll be continuing to talk to them over the coming days and weeks in that regard. Clearly, the department are equally concerned, and the Minister, I'm sure, is equally concerned that in putting in place the necessary financial controls that one would expect, that would not do harm to individuals where there are very high-profile operations that are required to assist them. And we have included that in our discussions around how we can ensure that the right processes are there to provide the protections that are needed in the community through our various operations, while at the same time being conscious of the budget that's available to us. It's something I think that we can discuss in more detail at the next Organisation Development Committee. I think it would be useful for us to do that. I know the Chair equally has commented in the past about the need to have a discussion about the financial issues associated with that. Equally, we'd be very supportive of that as a process. So it's something we'll keep the authority. I'm more than happy to keep the authority, in the loop on, and explain exactly what's happening in that. I would expect certainly at our next meeting that we have a far we'd be far clearer about the actions for now on your end.
Very good, thank you. It's that combination of adapting to reality while at the same time having confidence in the ability to do what needs to be done. One of the other elements in the monthly report is the section in respect of the Code of Ethics and its implementation within the organisation, Commissioner. Two questions arise here. The first is, well, perhaps I should say that after a very good start this year in terms of preparing to embed the report, there was something of a hiatus, but there has been a renewed energy within the organisation, which we welcome, and which the Ethics Committee has been, in respect of which the Ethics Committee has been engaging with your colleagues, and AC Leahy, who now has the responsibility in that area. I think the two questions are, one, the statutory responsibility that is on the Commissioner to take such steps as are necessary and as the statute sets out, and your confidence that you will be able to satisfy that requirement. And secondly, to ask you a view on one of the issues that we have talked at some length and with some frequency at the Ethics Committee about the desirability, the importance as we see it, because of the strength of the message that it would convey across the organisation, of what we might call blended participation in any training programmes in relation to the Code of Ethics. That senior staff, senior officers would participate in the training side by side with their more junior colleagues, if I may use that term. We recognise, obviously, the disproportion in terms of the numbers that are involved. But even in some of the training, or in a representative sample of the training, if there were that mix of people from all grades and all ranks, it would be a really important statement of the fact that the Code of Ethics is for everybody. And I wonder whether you would be happy to support that idea and to indicate that that will, as far as is possible, be part of the process of embedding it within the organisation.
Absolutely, I would accept that. John can give more detail in relation to what is actually planned, but I can tell you from my own experience, and even last week at the passing out parade in Templemore at the attestation, where 181 young people were attested that morning, that after being attested, the next thing they did was that they signed the Code of Ethics publicly and together, having had a lot of input in their training sessions around the Code of Ethics, and it was embedded across all aspects of their training. I would see that it's important that we don't miss any opportunity with regard to the ongoing element of our training, and that includes all types of courses that we do, from specialist courses to general courses. But in relation to the introductory aspect and in the embedding piece, I see great value in doing exactly what you're saying. There might be practical issues, but we have to try and get over those. And I'm not sure about the detail, but I think John may have more detail about what is planned in the coming weeks and months and that.
I think on a couple of occasions here we have made a commitment that we, as a senior leadership team, will lead this programme from the front. And we have stressed the importance of our direct involvement in it. And certainly, as it has started and as it continues to roll out, we certainly, each and every one of us, will live up to that commitment. There is a specific training programme and a date set for the senior leadership team to be trained in it in the next couple of weeks. Each superintendent and chief superintendent has received a copy of the Code of Ethics, a copy of the documentation in relation to it, and they have been tasked with working with their people. So there is a very, very defined plan. It is beginning to roll out. You're obviously aware of the detail in relation to tendering and some of that. So leaving that aside, there is an absolute commitment that it will involve all members of the organisation at all levels together, working together as one unit. So it won't be for ranks or grades or roles or functions. It'll be everybody together, and all the training will be mixed.
Yeah, I think that is really reassuring, because it's the togetherness is the important issue, that it's not handed down from on high, but it involves everybody. And the chair of the authority acknowledged in quite striking terms yesterday at the Oireachtas committee the significance of the signing of the Code of Ethics by the newly attested Garda. That was an important moment. And the final question from me, and this relates to an aspect of the increase in the civilian numbers in the organisation and the redeployment of Gardaí from administrative roles to policing duties, which we've touched upon on many occasions. But one particular element in the report that I just might ask your view on is that in relation to a particular range of recruitments, there's an identification that in a process that produced, I think, 212 recruits, 101 people withdrew at various stages of the competition, which is a significantly high proportion, and at a time, when there are increasing opportunities available to people in employment terms, but also when there is a real need to attract people into the organisation. It's a level of attrition that is difficult to sustain, and I wonder if you had any comments you wanted to make in relation to it.
Yeah, we've been looking at this very carefully over the past weeks because we're aware of our commitment to very quickly increase the number of civilians and our staff, and the commitment from government to provide the wherewithal for us to do that. So there's huge demand for that skill set, and right around the country we're getting lots of noise from our divisions and districts about the help they require from a civilian skilled set of people. Now, the difficulty and we've been having, and you've outlined it there, with regard to getting people off lists because of the nature of the work we do. There's a vetting element to getting people into our organisation. I think we need to ensure that we streamline that process as quickly as we can and get any of, and I know that David Gilbride, our Executive Director of Transformation and Strategy, who is managing the whole civilisation programme through our MRP office, has been looking at ways that and I might ask David to maybe expand on that for us in relation to how we could get this done a bit quicker.
Thanks, Commissioner. I suppose really what we're looking at the moment is kind of like the exact issue you've highlighted in terms of the significant attrition rate we're experiencing. It's not wildly dissimilar to other attrition rates in the public service in a buoyant labour market like we have at the moment. But I suppose I wouldn't want to give the impression that there isn't a significant number of civilians coming into the organisation. There is, but they're being used for the most part to backfill vacancies that are occurring within the organisation. But obviously we aren't getting enough in. Timeless of getting people in, obviously the big issue. The longer people are waiting between applying for a job and getting a job offer, is the more likely they are to get a better or different offer in the current labour market. So really we're looking at kind of the business processes that are within our control as well as ones that are without our control, particularly the ones within our control, to see how we can eliminate some of the delays in the process. Some of them are around issues like security clearance. It's a big issue. It's not exclusively that issue, and obviously it's a very important process that's been gone through. But what we're looking at is all elements of the process to see at each stage of the process how we can actually shorten those timeframes. Looking then in terms of how we look at how the redeployment is going to work, bringing a particular focus onto redeployment over the next number of weeks to see how we can accelerate and bring greater energy to the redeployment process to get people back out onto the front line. And then also we need to look at in terms of how the civilianization process and the redeployment process works in terms of some of our flagship reform programs such as the divisional model. So we're working on a plan looking at all of those processes, looking at the kind of mechanistic recruitment processes and then the more complex processes around redeployment and how they fit into our broader plans. And we're hoping to have a plan that we can share with the authority in the coming month or so.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very useful. Good morning, Commissioner.
Thanks, Bob. I should have said a special word of welcome to David. It's also your first time attending here, and while you may not have got mud questions today, I can assure you to get better. I know Noel has a final question. Noel?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a question in relation to driver training in Garda Síochána. You have a significant number of members driving on a daily basis on a chief's order with no training whatsoever. You have 2,500 who are trained basic level but aren't permitted to use blue lights or sirens when responding to calls. You indicated to us some months ago that you were going to go and talk to some other blue light agencies in the country, other state agencies and fire services and ambulance services and others, and with the view to seeing if something could be done. I understand you have a capacity to train about 700 drivers a year, and you're going to recruit over 2,500 new members in the next 2 years. Where have you got to with that, and what are your plans in terms of addressing that concern in relation to driver training?
Yeah, Chair, I'll take that one, Chair. I'll be looking at that aspect in relation to the whole area of driver training. we definitely have a capacity issue which I don't think we can address within the organisation. I've gone out and I've met other agencies who can provide that type of service for us. We're working with our own procurement people at the moment to go out to the market to see who will be able to supply that type of service to us, that will be able to fulfil some of our, we'll say, non-blue light initial part of the training, because not all of the Garda training programme is about driving at high speed, and there's aspects of that which I'm confident at this point in time that we could outsource. So we're out there, we're working with the market to see who's out there and who's available and who'll be able to fill that for us. So I think that aspect should be able to address not only the current deficit, but also give us the capacity to be able to provide fully trained Gardaí going out from the Garda College out onto the streets and every Garda station around the country, which I think every district officer would welcome to see in that category.
Look, we look forward to seeing that evolve, and it is a concern that many people are driving without any training. And we'd like to see that.
The key point is that to date we haven't identified another agency that is readily available to assist, and that's why we will be going to the market in the near future.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Noel. Any other colleagues? Just to follow up on that one, I mean, and I'm not asking for an answer now, it's just an observation, Assistant Commissioner Finn, but as you're thinking this through, I mean, the model that you're following with Code of Ethics, for example, is that all new recruits, and then you gradually go back. You might just consider whether, in fact, anybody should leave a test without at least having done the basic training in driving on an outsourced basis. Because I know it causes great disruption in stations where people have to go back, but while you've got them there, it's just something that we take very seriously, as Noel has said, and we'd like to see progress in reducing the number of people that are driving on chief's permission. It's a worry. Any further questions from my colleagues? I think not. Okay. It was remiss of me when we were talking about data quality not to recognise that the Garda Síochána Analysis Service recently received an award. Congratulations, Dr. Singh. An award for best use of data in the public sector, and I think that's, considering all of the talking we've done at this side of the table and challenge about the quality of the data, I think it's important when you're recognised by your peers in that context up against competition that we should also acknowledge it. So you might convey our congratulations to your team, and I look forward then to seeing the benefit of that wonderful award in better data quality generally in the period ahead. So with that, unless you have any closing remarks, Garmagat, and generally speaking, we've indicated that for our next public meeting, we'll be looking at the modernisation plan again, by way of taking a chunk of time around that. But subject to that, we're adjourned. Slán.